How is everybody feeling? I feel like that last panel really set the bar high for us, because, and I don't want to bring the energy down. So please work with me to keep the energy high. I'm Anne Shoket. It's so nice to see you. We are here, however, to talk about creating connection in a deeply disconnected world. And so hold on, it sounds heavy, but we are going to get to the point where we're going to talk about happiness and empathy and creating connection and finding your networks of support. And so I promise you, here is my promise to you, that by the end of this panel, you will walk out of this room with at least 3, maybe more, actionable tips of things you can put to work in your life. Stay with me. All right, let's talk about disconnection first. We are at a moment where the U.S. Surgeon General, past U.S. Surgeon General, has said that we are in a loneliness crisis that is on par with the opioid crisis. That loneliness and disconnect is as damaging to our lives as fentanyl. Last year, I was here at South by, and we released some data in our new report that showed that 80% of people are lonely because of their jobs, not just lonely at their jobs, lonely because of their jobs. And I'm sure that in all of your circles, you are feeling distrust, disconnection, overwhelm, and loneliness. And so, I'm going to start with this amazing panel. I'm going to start with Laurie, our Yale professor of happiness. Laurie, how did we get to this moment?
I think there are lots of factors that got us to this moment, right? One is the time issue that you brought up, overwhelm. I think we're busier and busier than ever. And this is particularly true for parents. This is one of the things the Surgeon General talks about a lot. So these days, parents are spending more time on parenting, like more time on solo childcare, and more time at work than they ever have in like the history of that we've been kind of like actually getting data on this stuff. And that just means that you have less time for meeting with friends, hanging out with your spouse, like just connecting in all these other ways. And so I think time is a big one. I think a second thing that's a big one is our technology, right? We've built these devices that so many of you are holding right now to connect with one another. But in practice, how many times do these devices wind up disconnecting us, right? I'll take my own example of like sitting with my husband at the dinner table and he's telling me something interesting. I'm like, and he's like, are you even listening? Or are you like checking something? And you're like, oh, sorry, right?
Plus our devices are pinging us and letting us know that like the thing you're doing, there's somebody else who wants your attention, something else that wants, that like this attention economy.
And that attention economy is just like affecting us psychologically in ways that we don't even realize. This researcher, Liz Dunn at the University of British Columbia, did this study about what happens when people are just in a waiting area with strangers when they have their devices out. You're actually not allowed to use it. It's just imagine if I had my phone on the table here. And what she finds is there's 30% less smiling between the people in the room because you have your device out. Like, what's going on? Well, like, your attention knows there's some interesting thing on the other side of the phone, even if you're not using it. And we just have become less socially connected. If you multiply that waiting room by everything that's happening in the world, every big city, everyone in Austin walking around looking at this thing, it's just like much less like very baseline social connection.
Michael, talk about empathy.
Yeah.
Where is this lack of empathy coming from?
Well, I think that if we look at the last 4 years, remote work got accelerated in 2020. Meanwhile, there was already this backdrop of like growing distrust and disconnection in our communities. And I'm not sure that we put full awareness on what we have to rebuild or even learn from the ground up in terms of being with the emotional experience of getting outside your comfort zone, moving towards someone that you think may not have the same views of you. So in terms of empathy, we've kind of practiced a lot of self-empathy, retreated a bit into our safe bubbles, into our cocoons, into mindfulness, but now we almost have to rebuild the skill of getting back out and meeting new people on an intentional level.
Cate, thank you for the perfect setup, Michael. Cate, you are this place, right? You have created this place for connection. Talk about the importance of the third place, of creating a place that sets the stage for empathy and connection.
Yeah, so I think whether it's in a space like Luminary in New York or our partner spaces, or even digitally, virtually, I think it's all about intentionality and being purposeful. So if you walk into a space like this and all you're doing is sitting on your phone, it's fine to video, but all you're doing is sitting on your phone, you're not being intentional. You're not being purposeful about why you're there. And so at Luminary, we really focus on picking our heads up. I like to walk around and ask people how they're doing, hello. After the election, I remember the day after the election, I literally just spent a few hours walking around giving people hugs, if they wanted it. And consent first.
Yeah.
But,
right, you gotta ask.
but I think that intentionality is missing, and that why you're going to something. We're also very transactional. I think when the pandemic hit and everybody's online and you're trying to accomplish so much, and if you're working in a workplace where you're trying to get your boss's attention but you're no longer face-to-face, you're in a networking group, you're in a mom's group, it became very transactional. We don't spend time having that small talk or collaborative approach because we're not seeing each other as much in person. I think even online, you can be extremely intentional. Even when we do our virtual programming, we have a digital moderator and someone who engages with that online audience so that they feel included. And I think the less intentional we are, the more excluded we feel.
Will you talk about what brought you to this personally? Because I am personally late to this loneliness conversation. I'm like, I'm not lonely. I'm surrounded by people.
Yeah.
I've got a huge community. And it wasn't until that I read the Surgeon General's report on loneliness and I was like, wait, what? Am I lonely? And I could see these moments in my life where I had taken big leaps in my career or had moved into a new position or had gone into some unknown situation. And I could see how unsupported and disconnected I actually felt. And to me, that was a revelation, and I couldn't then unsee it in so many other circumstances in my life. What was the moment that you realized, I think, that we need to build connection and intentionality? Like, what was that personal spark for you?
Yeah, so I spent 20 years on Wall Street, and I love that career. But I was finding myself, as much as I was mentoring the younger talent, speaking with clients, trying to do everything I possibly could in every single ERG at the companies that I worked for, I was really disconnected. I was spending so much time, especially for me, investing in others, and I wasn't investing in myself. And what I looked around and saw, okay, this is this very transactional nature of networking. And so if we take kind of the work out of networking and we build it around with the arms around it as community, and then you've got content and programming that you want to participate in, something that's relevant to what you're going through, whether that be menopause or leadership development, or I'm looking for a raise, or I'm trying to create that vision board that I never have time to do. Whatever that is, I really saw this need to stop siloing people, in particular women, into you're an entrepreneur, you're a banker, you're over 50, you're in media. Why don't we bring everyone together? And oh, by the way, let's not exclude the men. And so Luminary started where it was, let's be inclusive, let's have the conversations that we need to have as women, but not exclude the incredible men and allies that should be part of that conversation too. And so I wrote a business plan because I went to what I thought was going to be a great event, and I walked away with nothing. Not no connection, but it was like I was empty.
Yeah.
And I called my boyfriend, he's still my boyfriend, and he's like, write it down. And I was like, write what down? And he's like, you have a great idea. And so I wrote it down, and then there was a business plan. And it was all about this idea of, can we create community that's impactful, that's inclusive, that breaks down barriers for everyone, versus let's make this exclusive, let's do this, and that was just not, that was something that I built something that was lacking in my life, and here we are 6 years later.
Can you benchmark in your own life what it feels like now versus what it felt like then? Like, what does it feel like to be supported? Because maybe we don't even know what we're missing.
I'm, as a solo founder and a stiletto strapper, I
like that.
Yeah,
Stilettos.
because it's harder as women to build companies. It truly is, and BIPOC founders. So I use a lot of strapping. I'm still lonely. right? As a solo founder, I don't have a co-founder, I don't have a boss. I have to intentionally seek connection. Part of that is with the community, but by the end of the day, I sometimes am very depleted. And I also have to turn off.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that we can turn off. They both mentioned this idea of like, we are so busy. Women in particular, we're at capacity. So I've had to figure out ways for me to turn off, to be able to recharge so that that next meeting, that next Zoom, that next event, I'm ready to go.
That's really important, right?
And figure out your way to recharge. Mine is Korean dramas.
Oh,
And why is because they're subtitled. I cannot look at my phone or my laptop, otherwise I'm completely lost a minute later. And I like them. And so when my boyfriend walks in and he knows if I'm watching a Korean drama, he knows, don't interrupt me.
Yeah.
all right, mark it down. Korean dramas. I'm going to check your Insta to find out what are you watching. Michael, will you talk about men and talk about personally how you came into this loneliness, disconnection, and the importance of empathy?
Yeah. Well, for starters, I want to say yesterday I had to check in on myself. I had this dream of this ideal South by Southwest where I showed up at everything that I had on my calendar. But I also had this emergency plug where if I really did need to deviate from that plan, I'd already prepared for it in my mind. So yesterday, sadly, I had to experience a little bit of FOMO, but mostly a lot of joy. Mine was watching No Reservation and ordering some soup. But I think it's actually a good connection because a lot of my deepening in my work is around men's work. I prior to actually awakening to my deep disconnection, I was experiencing a bumpy life, a relationship that was on the rocks, unsatisfaction with my job, and one of the things I turned to was actually a guy that we once had a challenging relationship, and it got closer, and I asked him for support, and he invited me to his men's group. But where my work deepened was through loss. I ended up losing two siblings within 3 months of one another in 2019, and that cracked something really deeply open. I know that's unfolded so much abundance in my life in terms of being able to write a book and to move away from being a marketer into a thought leader and product creator. But when I experienced those losses, I realized that for all of my adult life, maybe sooner, I had been escaping my most challenging emotions. When fear came up, I might dive into work, or I might dive into partying, or in relationships when we started to really get to know one another and start to see where maybe our values weren't aligned, or where our habits, spending more time with each other, weren't aligned. I didn't have the skill set to have intentional conversations about that and evolve those relationships to a new place. So essentially, what underpins my work, teaching empathy through the book, The Power of Empathy and the Abundance Journal, is the work that I started with in men's work, and it's really getting super attuned to how your emotions show up in your body, because your emotions show up in your body before you can make a cognitive connection to, oh, that's fear. It might show up as shakiness in the hands or tension in the chest. But if you can then combine that with intentionality about how you want to show up, you can gradually start to form a new relationship with that emotion and not have it hijack where you intend to be with making connections.
I really appreciate what you're saying about the distraction behaviors, right? The ways in which we think that we are soothing ourselves with partying or work or like even the glass of wine at the end of the day, right? Or endless scrolling through Instagram, right? Whatever is numbing you, and you think that this is centering you, but it's actually making the disconnect work and pushing you further into your bubble. I really appreciate that insight because we often think that it's something else outside of us that's causing this disconnect, but it's actually can in a lot of ways be like just negative habits, negative behaviors. Thank you. Yeah, Laurie, thank you.
And just to follow up on that, I think the things we do when we're kind of disconnecting or distracting, we sometimes do that at the opportunity cost of what might actually make us feel better, which often is social connection. Often it's reaching out. you were talking about your moment of grief, and it was asking for help from somebody that you maybe didn't have the perfect relationship with that got you further. There's research on this showing that one of the fastest ways we can connect with other people is to ask them for help, ask them for support, ask them for advice. But we feel kind of vulnerable, like, oh, that makes us look weird, or maybe I had a falling out with this person, I can't. No, it's kind of right there for our taking. Similar, you mentioned this idea of kind of feeling overwhelmed, right? Research also shows that one of the ways to stop feeling so time pressured is to actually reach out to a friend and have a moment of real connection, right? Because one of the things that makes you feel kind of less overwhelmed is if you take an hour to connect with a friend, you leave that coffee date and feel like a little refreshed. As you said, you can go back to your work in a really different way.
It's funny that you say that. So last night, so I spoke at 2 things yesterday. I was really exhausted, and I had another event. And before we were leaving to go to this event, I said to my friend Alice, who's in the audience, I said, listen, I am really exhausted, and the only people I will have dinner with tonight are you and Maribel. They're both in the audience. And I was like, that's it. That's all I want, because they're friends, and I could just like decompress. If I didn't want to say something, or I just wanted to eat, that's all. And they know that. And I also get energy from them. And I think that's such a great point. You also have to seek out where you're getting that energy, or just feeling a safe environment that you can just be completely, if you're totally just fucked up, you can do that. And that's okay with no judgment. And I think the judgment thing is a big one.
And I think a disconnect, right? Because when we think we need that, like, oh,
Excuse me for my
cursing. I was like, oh, when we're feeling that depleted, we think the only way to recharge is like, oh, just Netflix by myself, scroll, I can't even, right? But actually, when you do that, you probably feel a little bit more apathetic. You actually feel more time strapped because now you're worried about work and you just wasted this time. Whereas social time never really feels that wasted. Yeah. It's always kind of energizing.
Exactly.
What I love about you, Laurie, this is the first time we've been in conversation together, although I'm a tremendous fan of the work that you do. What I love is that you are like deep into the research.
I'm a nerd.
Right?
I'm a nerd.
You're like super into the research. No, I appreciate this so much, because we're not just here like, oh, this is lovely, woo-woo, nice things to do, right? Like, this is hardcore research. Will you talk a little bit about the research that you have cited about how maybe we're not as disconnected as we think we are? We're all looking over here and saying, I don't agree with that person. That's not like me. I need to be around my people. And maybe maybe we're not so disconnected.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a sad thing that the science really shows us, right? Which is that our minds kind of lie to us about social connection at all different levels. There's this funny bias called the liking gap, which is if I ask you, how much does your really good friend like you? You might be like, oh, like 80% or something. Whereas if you ask the friend, they're like, no, 100,000%, like I love them so much, right? And this liking gap actually happens in little kids too. It starts emerging around age 5. Very sad, right? That's one-on-one interpersonally. But we also get things wrong when we're looking kind of at how we're doing maybe as a society or as a country or interpersonally. Researchers have talked a lot about this bias of false polarization. Then we look out at the world, we're like, oh my God, we're so polarized. The left and the right can't see eye to eye on anything. And it's true, we are polarized, but we're not as polarized as we think. And the reason this bias comes up, you can tell, is like all these algorithms, right? If you go on X or whatever it's called now, or go on Facebook and you have different people in different circles, the algorithm might start showing you the most extreme views, but that doesn't mean the average person on the other side has those views. And when you actually get people to talk together, like studies start to show just how connected we are. There's this lovely study by Laurie Santos out of Stanford, no relation to the Santos, but she does really cool work, where she finds people who have completely polar views on a particular issue, say immigration rights or climate change, gun control was another one. She gets them together on Zoom, and she tells them, you both have very different views on this topic. On your survey, you ranked it really differently. I want you to have a 15-minute conversation where you try to work through this and try to see eye to eye. This study was so scary that the Stanford Human Subjects Review Board had to put all these things in place. They're like, oh my gosh, you can't run this experiment without a moderator present. They were really worried what was going to happen. What happens? People have these very intense but very pleasant conversations. Ahead of time, they have a different group of subjects predict how, on a scale of 1 really miserable to 100, it was the perfect, most wonderful time, what would people rank this conversation? And then they asked those folks afterwards. Want to guess what the modal response was on a scale of 1 to 100? The modal response was 100. It It was the most interesting conversation they've had in a really long time. And most people afterwards demanded the contact information of this stranger they were talking to because they're like, I want to keep having these conversations. Again, the reason for saying this is not what our minds predict. You predict if you had to have a conversation with somebody with really different views that it would be terrible, but actually you learn something different. And you find things that break your stereotypes. Louisa told this great story on my podcast about how one of the conversations about gun control, one of the people who were really pro-guns was a queer man who lived in a really rural neighborhood. And he's like, I'm super pro-guns because this was the first time I felt safe in my community as a queer man. And it was like, that wasn't the stereotype this other person probably had about this like, gun-toting Texan person or something, right? And so we have to actually have these conversations to really get things across. And I think a barrier to those conversations is we're scared of them. We think they're going to go terribly, but actually they go much better than we expect.
I think that's really important to pay attention to. And you think you're alone or you think it's going to be terrible, but you need to have that one, and it's the one-on-one connection, right?
That's right,
It's not,
that's
it's in a smaller space where you can be seen, and it's probably not on text.
That's right, that's right.
Or on social media. I think that's really, really special. Especially it shows up in our research too. If 80% of people think they are lonely, you are not the only one.
Yes.
You are not alone in your loneliness. I want to switch now to helping solve some of these things that we've talked about. Michael, talk about the curiosity game.
Yeah, so in 2018, just as I started to notice the rising divisiveness in this country, I started to experiment with how to meet people where they're at and help them get past that fear that Dr. Santos speaks about. And so we created a game called Actually Curious, and it gamifies you starting light and building into deeper and more difficult conversations over time. The truth is, though, however, after I created the game, I realized I hated playing it because I wasn't really that comfortable getting into some of the topics. And we talk about connection, and we talk a bit about inner work, but we don't often talk about the relationship between the two. When you know your habits, you know where you lean into disconnection, you can actually systematically start finding just small little ways to get a little bit closer to this ideal that you have. I mean, hearing the research is actually like a small way, because I heard your research, it now builds a mapping that, there's possibility and it's been proven and I can go watch it. That's modeling out in the world. Anyone who's a creator in storytelling, try Actually Curious, bring it into an experience and record it, and then put that out into the world and show others how you can go from, I'm afraid to have this conversation, to I can. But I think the other thing is, when I talk about the inner work, is where are your gaps? I know for me, over the last 4 years, I've gone through so much growth because I've been using the same things that I use to connect to others to get closer to where I have a room for emotional growth. As a result, now I've gone from from a introvert with social anxiety to a keynote speaker, and that's taken literally like little conversations one-on-one to conversations with strangers where I share my story, to building a habit around it to that place. So I share that mapping so that wherever you are in terms of where you think you want to be in connection, whether that be as a facilitator or a bridge builder or just making more friends, start to see if you can break it into breadcrumbs and kind of make it an easier path to where you want to be over time.
You said something to me in our prep call that I want you to share with the audience, which is, what is the internal dialogue that's pulling you away from the conversations? Because when you said it to me, I was like, I see myself in that conversation. Because what we're talking about feels like, you're like, what kind of conversation couldn't I have? Like, I could have whatever conversation. Yeah. Can you put a finger on that internal dialogue?
Well, the thing that, as I drop into presence, the thing that comes to mind is our ego. And having a conversation with it. When I walk into a room, is it my habit to go find the people that I know and then just to stick there? Then if I notice that, I can notice that, that's just one way that I let my ego feel safe. But now that I'm aware of it, I can start to broaden it. Part of the way that I broaden my comfort level is I do advanced homework to put myself in rooms with people who are values aligned. I can feel comfortable sharing vulnerably even fairly soon where I'm at, like, oh, I'm actually quite introverted, and they meet me there.
Yeah.
I put myself in rooms with people that allow me to be myself.
I think that's great. Cate, I want to talk about intentionality. You brought it up as you're building an intentional community, but I want to talk about how you have intentionally built your team to create support and togetherness.
So from day one, I know from running big businesses at the three of the largest banks in the world, you have to have different perspectives, right? You have to have different faces around the table. You have to have different ideas. That leads to better collaboration. That leads to innovation. That leads to change. And so from day one, it was all about who could I surround myself, yes, that complements the skills or the skills that I don't have, but also that have different perspective that bring that. And so when you look at our team, it's very multi-generational, it's very intersectional, it's very diverse for a reason. We have moms, we have single moms, we have caregivers, we have Gen Z, we have millennials, we have Gen X, and that was all by design, and it continues to be by design, regardless of what's happening in the world around this pulling back from DE&I. I don't believe it. Don't believe the hype, right? Because all of this work still has to continue, and so for me, being intentional about building my team led to us as a team being intentional about building not only the community that we've built, but also because we have a B2C and a B2B model, being intentional about the companies we want to work with, right? As a solo founder, as the only shareholder in the company, I can say who I want to work with and who I don't. So if they are mission aligned, values aligned, fabulous. If they're not, I don't need to work with them. And I think that has bled down, not just into the team, it's now just part of the community. Everyone's there for the right reasons. My mom taught me very early on, if you can go into every day with the best intentions and also think that people are genuinely good, you will have a much better day. And so that's the approach we take. We do our best every day. Sometimes we're not going to get it right. And sometimes there are going to be people that rub us the wrong way, don't believe what we believe. But I have to believe that the world is generally good, and that's what we seek out every day in our community, virtually and physically.
And you're modeling how you find intentionality, how you bridge differences, how you come together for collaboration and connection.
Yeah.
It's really special.
I haven't had an office in 6 years. I worked in the space when I'm there. It's 25,000 square feet space in New York. And so
it's very pretty.
It's very big. And so, but now 6 years in, I finally have an office. And I've realized I don't even need, I love to walk around. I don't need to because the community's already living it and breathing it every day, whether Cate's there or not. That wasn't the same when we started because I had to role model. I think role modeling is also very important so that the people around you see how you're reacting in different situations, how you're being empathetic, how you're creating community, how you're being intentional. And that's really important to me that everyone's doing that inside.
I can't believe we literally have 2 minutes left because I didn't even get to like all the good stuff. So I'm gonna just drop in on the one thing. Laurie, we didn't even talk about this moment that we are all living through, right? Laurie, what is the one thing that you want everybody in this room to do to help navigate this moment of disconnect that we are living through?
Just connect. Just talk to someone. Even if just today at South by, a stranger, instead of like having some event where you're just looking at your phone or talking to that person you met, just like try to connect. What brought you to South by? And just hear these interesting stories. Let yourself do it. Notice kind of as Michael was saying, like it might feel icky at first. There is that friction, that sort of speed bump to get over of talking to somebody new. But if you practice it, it'll become easier over time.
Thank you. Michael, what's the one thing?
We need more empathetic leaders. Those are people who are willing to do the inner work, to be the mediators, to be the bridge builders, to foster connection, to model it. And those are going to be our future best friends, our future health proxies, our future leaders, hopefully.
Cate, one thing.
Just keep moving forward, one step at a time. But we are on a wonderful path, despite what's happening in the world, especially for the women and allies in this room. So keep moving forward, be intentional about it, and open up the dialogue.
Yes.
We need more dialogue and communication for us to be able to collectively have a better world.
Amazing. I love this so much. I actually have one more takeaway for you.
Yeah.
In our research that we did last year, 10 minutes is all you need every day to intentionally build your network. We've had this huge decline in time spent together, and if everybody spent 10 minutes a day intentionally building their network, we would decrease this huge 20-year decline, this loneliness gap, by 50%. So I'm asking everybody, 10 minutes, intentionally reach out to someone. This is a moment where I like technology. Text the person who's been on your mind, link in with the person who's been on your mind to say, I see you, I've been thinking of you, how are you, how can I help?
Amazing.
This is my takeaway for you. Thank you all so much for this amazing panel. Thank you all for being such a good audience. I wish you connection and togetherness.
And have a great conference.
Yeah.